it makes no sense to scrap or bury or crush perfectly good components. Why would you do that? We make it so easy. We take all the labor, all the hassle out of it for you. Just give us access to the stock in whatever fashion you're comfortable, and we'll make sure it gets to a good home and you get your money back.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Control Listen podcast brought to you by Octopart. Today we have a very special guest for you. This is Kenny McGee, CEO of Component Sense. Thank you so much for joining us, Kenny. Great to have you.
Hi, James. Thank you. It's great to be here.
So did you want to start by telling us about your story then, your background?
Yeah, sure. So I started out in electronics in 1985. So I was a young 16-year-old apprentice with a company called Ferranti, which was a large electronics manufacturer for military and defence. So we were building navigation systems predominantly and radar systems. So we weren't in the sort of hard end of military manufacturing, but a lot of electronics, very sophisticated stuff. Long lead times in the parts, small volume, but I did actually run the first volume product through in that company. So as an engineer, once I was qualified, that was my first role, was to simplify the process so that we could have less skilled staff building the product, because it was infinitely higher volume than we were used to. It was still only, I think, 500 units a year, which
Okay.
to a proper volume manufacturer is still tiny, but we were used to making one unit every year and a half. When you're
Okay.
building a great big piece of kit for a ship, you're not
Right.
producing many of them. But this was infinitely higher volume, and we had to simplify the process. So I was all about operational efficiency and simplification, both in design and in the process itself. That's where I started out.
Fantastic. And then Component Sense. Before you get into the background of the company, how did you come to be involved with Component Sense?
Yeah, so Component Sense, I'm the founder. I created it in 2001. Prior to that, I was working with Arrow Electronics. So Arrow is one of the biggest franchise distributors in the world, and I had to look after Scotland, basically. So all the Scottish customers of Arrow were in my remit, and I was looking after them. My job was sales. There was a technical aspect to it. I was helping design in components so that they would continually be an Arrow customer. So that was a focus for us. The Scottish customer base had largely moved. The volume producers had already started to migrate to Europe, and particularly Eastern Europe. So, Poland, Ukraine, Romania, Hungary. So the big volume users in the UK were already migrating by that point. So my clients tended to be a little bit smaller. Again, a lot of them were military or defence contractors, people like Raytheon, Honeywell, people like that. So yeah, still world famous companies, but it was interesting. It was an interesting role. I did it for about 2 years, and during that time, I was visiting factories and seeing stock piled up in the corner, disregarded. You could tell, in a production facility, it's very orderly, it's very organized, everything's exactly where it should be. But I was seeing what I knew was valuable stock kind of just shoved in the corner. And I started to ask questions about it. But it wasn't really my job. I was just trying to understand what was going on there. It just really struck me. It looked odd. So I was told in this particular company in Perth, in Scotland, not Perth, Australia, Perth, Scotland, that it's just excess. It's just excess. Not really worried about it. And I could just tell it was worth money. Components come in beautiful foil packs, to keep the moisture and the air out so that they don't oxidize. And when you see it in a silver pack, that suggests there's value in it. It's almost, to my eye, it's like gold bars. If it's in a solid silver pack, it looks like gold bars to me. So I knew there was value in it, and I asked a few questions around it. So it was a significant amount of stock. I think they had £3.2 million, so about $5 million at that time in excess, which was, as I say, pushed aside. So to them, it was junk. But it was all brand new, still in its original packaging, and it was all traceable back to the manufacturer. So I identified the problem. They were keen to sell it. I went back to my guys at Arrow and spoke to my CEO and asked him if we could help them with this problem, maybe take it off them, buy it from them. We could easily have redistributed it. We knew all the users. Literally our system was full of other users of those same components. So it seemed like a no-brainer to me. I think now looking back, I was naive to the franchise rules. So when you take a franchise on from Analog Devices or Xilinx or any of these guys, you're abiding by their rules, and they wouldn't want you necessarily redistributing components. So I think now, as a much older, much more experienced person, I can see that they probably weren't allowed to recycle or redistribute that stock. By the time, it just frustrated me that the answer was just an outright no, not interested. I felt it was a bit poor on customer service at the time, and I really wanted to help my client ultimately. So it was all ticking over my head. This was 2000, probably late 2000. There was a big boom in the industry back then, similar to the one we saw 21, 22. So 99, 2000 was a big electronics boom, and it collapsed January 2001. Arrow was making massive cuts, and they were letting people go left, right, and centre. So I saw that as a good time to step out and go on my own.
And then obviously you founded the company that we are discussing today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the company, what its primary goals are, and just that story of it becoming founded?
Yeah, so I mean, it literally did spawn from that pile of stock in the corner.
Right.
They were my first client. I suggested I could help find homes for that stock. Proved infinitely harder than I expected. I didn't have the database that Arrow had that told me who uses those components. So I was doing it in a very, very old-fashioned and basic way. I was literally cold calling similar companies that may use those parts in a very, rough and ready cold calling complete strangers to say, hey, do you use this part? And, it wasn't particularly successful. So I went 2 years without a sale. By this time, I was quite heavily in debt. I was determined to make it work and find a way to make it work. I started to realize there was a network of brokers in the world, which, again, in my naivety, I didn't know that there was such a thing. So I was able to connect up with other brokers, and they became my outlet for the stock. So I was able to advertise the stock. They would buy it and they would sell it into other OEMs. So it gave me global reach whilst still being a very, very tiny business at the time, just myself for the first few years. And then gradually grew the business and then acquired more stock, more clients to help. And that's really the foundation of it. And, we're very focused on reducing waste. That was my sort of shock at this, was millions of dollars just sitting in a corner, neglected. It just seemed so wasteful. I wanted to try and find a new home for that stock. And that's really still what we do. We're very narrowly focused. That is all we do, is move excess stock, find a new home for it. We can typically get the big manufacturers all their money back. So I quickly learned that companies don't like to sell for a loss, particularly when it's still on the books at full value. So we kind of migrated from smallish, maybe 100 million turnover companies to billion-dollar companies, because we realized that billion-dollar companies have phenomenal buying power, and they can buy a chip that, a local company here might be paying $5 for, they're paying $1 for. So big differential in price. So I can give that company all their money back. I can maybe even give them a profit, and I can sell it downstream to that smaller company for less than they're currently paying. So everybody wins. So that was the realization I came to in the long run, that it's better to buy from the big guys, and the big guys have much stricter quality procedures too. So typically the stock's bought direct from the chip maker. It gives me real reassurance if I've got that traceability. And particularly in light of counterfeits that started to show up in 2005, 6.
Okay.
If I have traceability, that's better than any inspection.
Makes sense. So I guess it's an afterthought for a lot of people, the world of excess and obsolete electronics Do you want to just maybe explain to people a little bit about what's involved in that space and how much of a, I guess, best way to put it is how much lost opportunity there is in that space?
Yeah, I mean, it's a byproduct of manufacturing. You're always going to have excess. You're always going to have obsolete. So there's different definitions of excess and obsolete. Obsolete in particular, engineers call it obsolete when the chip maker no longer makes it, but supply chain typically call it obsolete when they no longer need it. So there is slight differences there. So in
Right,
this world I live in, obsolete is dead for that company, but it's probably quite active for somebody else.
right,
So whilst they have no further use for it, and a phone's a great example. Phones change every year, and there's components in that new phone that migrate from the previous one, but there's other components that are no longer needed. They're not high tech enough for this new model, so they become excess or obsolete, and they
okay,
just get dumped in the corner. There's nothing wrong with those chips. They're brand new, still in the original packaging, traceable, and there is hundreds and thousands of other companies that are still using them. So for
right,
them, it's not obsolete. So the terminology does get confusing, unfortunately.
sure,
But,
definitely,
it's all buckets, if you like. We try and divide it into buckets. If it's dead for you, let's try and move it quickly. Don't be too greedy. Let's get it moved quite quickly. If it's slow moving for you, which is one of the excess definitions, is you've got 10,000 pieces, but you only need 1,000 this year.
okay,
On that pace of usage, it's going to be 10 years before you get rid of that stock. So maybe
right,
get rid of some of it now, reduce the burden, put the money back in the bank, and then if you need more than 5 years' time, you can buy more than 5 years' time, as long as it's not engineering obsolete, as in no longer manufactured. So
right. End of life, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so there's a term that I've heard a lot around this, which is the circular economy, and obviously that relates to e-waste. Do you want to explain a little bit about the circular economy and that concept?
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't really talked about much when I started the business 2001. I mean, the concept of what I was trying to do was exactly circular. So it's taking it
Right,
from one person and getting it to another that could use it. So that we've got a little logo. Our chip logo is like an IC, and then we've got a character called Chip, who is effectively an IC on legs, um, and we talk about him as a true device, a device, and the goal is to make sure he fulfills his potential. So if we think of that device, any device that's sitting in the corner, it's it's not being used for its full potential, and we really want it to have a life, I guess. And I think we've even got a little cartoon about it, about Chip being a bit depressed because he's dumped in the corner, and it's a fun representation of the reality of waste. So as the circular economy developed and people started to talk about it, it automatically fitted with what we were already doing. So yeah, if a chip was made, the resources going into that chip are enormous in terms of power, in terms of minerals and metals, things pulled out of the ground, the damage done to the world in order to collect those elements to then form them into a chip. If that chip isn't used and it ends up back in landfill or crushed or maybe even fueling the counterfeit economy, that's really bad for everyone. Whereas if it goes into a product and has a 10-year lifespan, that's far, far better.
when I was talking to Ash, she mentioned that you visited Ghana in 2024, that you had a really great example of this. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so Ghana came to me about 2007. I heard about our e-waste from the UK ending up in Ghana. So there was a documentary I saw on TV, and the e-waste from here, we take it to our local tip, dump, amenity site, whatever you want to call it, for recycling. So we think
Right.
that item's getting recycled. But the truth of this documentary was they realised and found that it was being shipped abroad.
Okay.
Now, we're not allowed to do that. It's been illegal since the year 2000, but it was still happening. And it was
Right.
happening on scale. There's been loads of documentaries about it since. It's definitely happening in Australia. I saw a documentary specifically targeting Australia on that one. And this stock is being sold or moved into countries like Ghana. It's happening a lot in India. It's happening a lot in China.
Mhm.
Sold as working goods,
Right.
some of which may work, some won't. Fair proportion doesn't, in my experience. So I wanted to learn for myself. So many years had passed, 2007 to 24. It still was bothering me, and I want to do something about it. But rather than just go off a documentary, I wanted to see it for myself. I wanted to understand it better. So
Right.
I went out with a wonderful photojournalist called Carolina Rupezzi, and
Okay.
she'd been out a couple of times before. She'd been taking photographs, and when I had one of my marketing people do some research on it and was writing a blog, I asked her to go find some photos. We need some photos to go with this article, and she found Carolina's photos. Asked for permission to use them. Carolina was more than happy as long as we were fighting the same cause.
Right.
Um, and when I saw the photos, they were really, really amazing, and really got over the feeling and the human cost of this e-waste. So from that, I said, look, let's get Carolina up here. I want to interview her, and that was the very first sort of video I've ever done. So we're going to be starting a podcast soon, but that was the first video I'd done, and we just did it off the cuff because I needed to ask her questions about it. We literally just set up a couple of iPhones and filmed the thing. And it was amazing to learn firsthand from her experience what it was like out there and what was happening with our e-waste. So by
Right.
the time we got to the end of it, I actually watched it back last night with my mother-in-law because she's never seen it before, and it was good timing coming on here today with that being fresh in my head. But
Yeah.
it really is. It's emotional going out there and seeing what's going on. And I wanted to follow the supply chain all the way from the ports where these containers are arriving full of waste. They then tend to go to a sort of retail area where they're selling second-hand goods.
Okay.
They'll buy up, if there's a pile of TVs in that container, somebody will buy up the whole batch. They'll plug them all in, see which ones are working. We were seeing about 20% that worked.
Okay.
So roughly 20% were working. The rest would then get moved on to another town. So there was another town that tended to be the repair shop, and they
Interesting.
would try and fix what they could, and they would maybe get another 20% or so fixed. Some of the ones that they couldn't fix would become spare parts for
Okay.
repair. It was a beautiful setup, actually. All very informal, but it was actually like a perfect production line. So the repairers would hold on to circuit boards from different products in the hope they could one day sell that circuit board to a repairer.
Interesting.
And then finally, the rest became e-waste. Somebody would show up in a motorbike with a trailer on the back and drag this waste down to Agbogbloshie, which is that's the area that's known as the world's largest e-waste site. So that's where the
Oh,
products end up. And that's the bit that everybody sees in the documentaries. But I would really want you to understand that entire supply chain.
right.
And even from there, the circuit boards now, they used to just get burnt as well. So they tend to burn things to get to the metals. It's the
All right.
fastest way to get to the value, if you like, at that stage. So they want to burn it and get to the copper and the
Right.
aluminiums and things like that. So horrible process, really horrible process for the environment and particularly for their own health.
Right. Yeah, I'm imagining inhaling that's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
great. Yeah.
I spent 2 weeks in that area, and I met with the guys that were doing the job. And some people had tried to support them with cleaner ways of stripping cable, for example, but it's not as fast. And when you're trying to feed your family on $2.50 a day, fast unfortunately gets the priority over clean. Their electricity supply is not particularly stable either, so they had mechanical issues with the equipment too. So it was unbelievable to see it firsthand, to spend time with the people and realize, for me, just the human side of it. They're just trying to survive. They're just trying to feed their families the same as we are. It's a pretty desperate situation. I would love to be able to help properly, We've done little bits of support so far. My goal long term is to get the people that supply us our components, which are massive manufacturers, to support in a small way. It's like I describe, my particular phone's an Apple. It's an absolute fortune when I replace it. Um, if it cost me an extra $5 or $10, it would not matter at all. I wouldn't even notice. If that $5 or $10 went to a place like this in Ghana, it could do a lot of good multiplied by the volume. So, a fairly small donation, if you like, from the equipment users could really properly clean up and help fund the economy as well. I mean, the economy is, it's desperate enough that people are traveling 7 hours to burn cable. Um, with a bit of help, they could clean that whole thing up and they could become the recycling centre of the world.
Right.
We've
Right.
done
If some facilities were constructed with proper equipment and
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
they're willing to do the work. So just, definitely, I agree.
Yeah,
That
they're
investment would be
hardworking, lovely
fantastic.
people. I mean, they were so welcoming.
Yeah.
They were just wonderful. I felt perfectly safe. I stood out like a sore thumb. This shiny head,
Right.
white shiny head in amongst the locals. You could spot
Mhm.
me from probably a mile away. But yeah, it was great. It was really interesting, and I desperately want to do more for them.
Thank you for the story because it gives an insight that you always see the big picture, but you never hear the on the ground stuff. So I think it's very insightful to actually see what it's like and what that process is like. It goes somewhere. The matter doesn't disappear, and people just kind of it's out of sight, out of mind. I think for a lot of people.
Yeah, the technology
So
exists to recycle properly. It's
right.
expensive. Somebody has to fund that and get that started. Um, the people there are hardworking. There was some amazing entrepreneurs in there. I saw all kinds of things. The repairers in particular, taking something that we would throw away because it's not working. They
Hmm.
would take the time and they would learn how to fix it. And they were soldering in tiny little devices, tiny little components into mobile phones, into laptops, and repairing them like the old days. We've not repaired
Right.
things for decades now.
Yeah.
You know,
It's definitely a
at
throwaway
very
culture.
best, you chuck away the entire circuit board and plug in a new one. At
Yes,
best, but
definitely.
nowadays it's quite often not just chuck away the whole thing, and it's so wasteful. So I was really quite reassured to see things getting a longer life.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's going to be crucial as well going forward with resource scarcity as we progress as a planet, more consumption, more scarcity. We're going to have to get better at the sort of reuse, recycle, repair side of
For
things, or
sure.
it's just not going to be sustainable.
Yeah, yeah. I've got a slide in my slide deck when I'm selling, when I'm out talking to potential clients. It's the periodic table. So if you remember that from your old science lab, 3/4 of those elements are in the average mobile phone. And then a lot of those are rare or endangered and going to be impossible to find maybe 100 years from now. They're getting harder and harder to find. A lot of the conflicts around the world right now are all around minerals. You know, it's a big mess. So the more we can do to reduce usage, the better.
For sure. I wanted to pivot for a second and talk about something I saw on your website. So you listed that you had in-plant, consignment, or outright purchase as options. I wanted to know what the difference was between those three.
Okay. So yeah, when I first started, I was a one-man business. I had zero cash. So I created a model called consignment. So I could physically take the goods from my supplier, so manufacturing company nearby, I could literally go with a van, collect the goods, put them in my warehouse, and sell them on their behalf. So that's where the consignment began. And it was through necessity. I didn't have the capital to lay out and buy stock. Worked for some clients liked that, others didn't. And I just had to work with the ones that were comfortable with that. It was created through necessity because I didn't have the capital to physically buy stock. And I certainly didn't have the technology at that time to do something as sophisticated as in-plant. So in-plant came much later. So I started out consigning stock and managing it for people. Customers often asked for cash, and I just didn't have the money to offer that at the early stages. So as capital built up in the business, I would offer both cash or consignment, and it depended on the company's preference. I'm very highly customer focused. So I want to give options typically. We then started to get into bigger factories. Once we started to get into the $1 billion factories and wandering around there, we could see that 1% roughly of a company's revenue was tied up in what we called earlier obsolete stock. So stuff they will never use again. So 1% of revenue on $1 billion is still a chunky amount of stock. But we realized there was much more stock in the factory that was slow moving or excess. And that equates to typically 10% of revenue. So 10% of $1 billion is now a very large sum of money that is tied up in stock that isn't currently needed and certainly not in the near future. So we typically look out maybe a year and identify stock that isn't going to be consumed within a year. We would deem that excess and we would actively market that stock and try and move it on, because forecasts change. So if you're forecasting and I've got 5 years worth of this stock, it's a pretty uncomfortable position for a manufacturing company to be in. Because if the forecast does drop, you're stuck with that stuff. That's your future obsolete. So that's what we're trying to prevent. We started to realize that actually the bigger issue is this slow moving excess stock. So the obsolete we can deal with, we can buy it cash, we can consign it. But if you're a big enough client to justify our implant product, which we created ourselves about 2010 in conjunction with one of the biggest EMSs in the world, we worked with them very closely, and we were able to manage all of the stock in their plant, hence the name. So physically on site, we don't move it. We don't want to incur extra cost physically moving it, and we don't really want the environmental impact of moving it from one country to another unnecessarily. So we can leave it on site. If their forecast increases, they can use it, and if their forecast decreases, we can sell it. And it's live. It's working on live data straight from their MRP system. So whether it's SAP or some other MRP system, we know what's for sale on a given day. We can sell it and then move it from there only as it's sold. So highly efficient. We can work on really low margins. The client in those situations is usually getting all their money back, if not more. So it's a pretty cool product, actually.
That's fantastic. Yeah, very cool. So I saw you had some case studies as well. I know there was one that was for Corning Inc. Do you want to get into a little bit of that case study and just give an example of sort of how this whole thing works in a real scenario?
Yeah, sure. So Corning was an interesting one. They contacted us. Their stock was sitting in an EMS. They were gradually pulling out of working with that EMS. They were transferring some business to another company in a different country. And they asked us to come in and look at stock that was dead. So for them, dead, obsolete. It was quite a large quantity. It was, multi-million dollars. We went in to have a look, and we quickly identified that we could resell it. We had to uplift it because the EMS, an EMS isn't really designed for selling single items, small batches. So, if we try and get an EMS to do that, they usually struggle. They're used to shipping pallet loads of finished goods. So their entire process is designed for that. We want to be able to ship small packages of 10,000 to 100,000 of a component. It could still be a tiny package in many cases. So it's a bit different. Some EMSs allow us to go in plant and we set all of that up for them. This particular EMS we weren't engaged with. So the decision was made to take it off site. So we literally decided that while we were there. Again, very customer focused, just trying to find a solution. So sat around the boardroom table inside the EMS with the client. We quickly decided this, getting them to pick and pack and ship this product for us one item at a time wasn't going to work. So we drove around the area, Guadalajara, and we found a third-party logistics company that we felt could support us. And we pretty much switched it on within a week or two. We moved all the stock to there and managed it from there. We're still working with those guys now. We've since loaded in stock from multiple other Mexican EMSs. So again, it's created a new model for us where we can take stock from anywhere in the world. We can set up one of these third-party logistics sites. It's DSV we currently work with. We can set it up in a week to 2 weeks. So brand new stock. We're out in Vietnam recently looking at a big batch of stock. We can move that into a DSV site and have it up for sale within 2 weeks. So it's pretty cool. Um, yeah, exactly. Yeah, we can ramp it up. We can ramp it down. We can move it country if we have to. Vietnam's got some interesting rules around tariffs and VAT at the moment, and in retaliation to some of the things that Donald Trump's been up to. So it's yeah, a very fast changing world. So you've got to be flexible. But Corning were really happy with what we did. We managed to reduce that stock significantly. They gave us a target. I think they needed £2 million by Christmas. We managed to get them that. Sorry, dollars. We managed to get them that, and then they decided they wanted to sell it. So again, we're always happy to see this thing through to the end, whatever the end is for them. But it's client driven. This particular client wanted to just draw a line under it, move it on. New financial year, write it off. So we bought the balance for cash based on our original valuation. So we always value it at the start, and we can do any number of, a mixture of things, some cash, some consignment, some implant. We can mix and match to suit the client. So yeah, Cording's one of the few. Most of our clients, we've got NDAs with all of our clients, but most won't even let us talk about them. We're not allowed to mention them at all. But Corning's given us approval to discuss what happened there.
Okay, that makes total sense. Yeah, that's great to hear. So there's a hot button topic that everyone's discussing right now, and I'm sure you're included is probably going to be, it's AI. Does AI play any major role in your company and the way it operates?
It does now, for sure. Yeah. So, I've been droning on about AI for probably about 4 or 5 years and harassing my tech team. We've got our own in-house developers. So these systems we've got in plant and others are home built. So we've got a team of developers. And AI has been in the news for a long time. And yeah, I've been keen to explore what's possible for a long time. But the technology wasn't that user-friendly until recently. So probably about a year ago, we started to play around with AI. We always did a lot of automation. That's why we built systems. So we built our own internal systems so that we could automate the purchase order process, the sales order process, the picking, packing. Our implant guys operate from an iPad. So they're literally getting sent information. Hey, go and get this part, take a photo, send it to, pop it into the iPad, and our salespeople automatically get a message to say, hey, here's your photo, and they'll ping it out to the customer. But we've gone way beyond that with our automation. A lot of people are calling automation AI, and it's not strictly true. So we've been reluctant to shout about, hey, we're using AI, because it's a bit like greenwashing. People are jumping on the green bandwagon, and it's often not strictly true. It's jumping on the bandwagon for the sake of it rather than truly believing in it. And AI is quite similar. We hear a lot of people talk about AI, but are they really using it? Our developers are working now extensively with AI. They're all using Claude currently for coding. We're able to produce customized solutions much, much faster. So, the implant system was created for one particular huge EMS. Every time you take it to a new EMS, there's little tweaks need made, so you have to alter it and amend it, and that can sometimes take time. With AI now, we're able to make those amendments and those customizations much, much faster. We actually had a whole team meeting, so we got all our staff to the UK just 2 weeks ago. We had what they call vibe coding sessions. So we broke the teams up, not by department. Intentionally, we broke them up into mixed departmental people. I think we had about 6 groups, aided by a tech, and the tech wasn't allowed to come up with any ideas. They were just to help us put our ideas into Claude, and it was amazing. We did it for an hour, and every team created a fantastic web-based tool of their choosing in an hour. And it would still need more refinement, but to get that concept physically working in an hour is just unbelievable. It seriously would have been months before to get to the stage we got to in just 1 hour. So super exciting, and particularly for somebody that wants to customize solutions. So yeah,
Definitely. I think the where some companies go wrong, I feel, is that instead of using it as a tool to streamline and improve their processes, like you did, they kind of replace the actual people in the company with it. They think of it as all in one solution that you no longer need people to be involved. And I feel like that's not the case. I feel like it's meant to assist your people, it's not meant to replace them. And that's where people are running into issues.
we're having great fun with it. I mean, we've got workers from 20-year-old, in fact, 18-year-old, all the way up to 60 something, and they're all getting involved with it now. I mean, I've been to AI seminars maybe a year or so ago, physical and online, and the expert in the room is basically using Chat GPT like Google, and they're telling us that this is amazing, it's doing these great things for me. But that's the kind of basic part of these tools. um, you know when you start coding with it and creating things, it's incredible what's achievable. And that's what we wanted to do 2 weeks ago, is literally have every single individual within the company seeing for themselves just how exciting AI can be. And the enthusiasm was incredible. The things we created were incredible. I mean, my group, I didn't get overly involved, but there's a girl in our team who loves to travel. So she said, I really need a tool that'll find me the best holiday at the best price, and tell me even where I should go. So I said, well, okay, that's interesting, but for me, I'm typically traveling and doing multi-site visits. So I've got a trip to the States soon, and I'm trying to visit about 20 different companies all across the States and Canada. I'm doing that mid June, into July a little bit. Um, and that's very complex, much more complex. So I added some of that in. Right, okay, so I've got all these stops. I've got to do it in the most efficient and eco-friendly fashion possible. How should I do that? So that added a lot of complexity to it. And then, of course, we wanted it to look cool. So, we needed the globe spinning and, zoom in on the area. And, literally, we were able to do the vast majority of that in 1 hour.
Yeah,
It's
that was
just
fantastic.
incredible. Really cool.
Definitely.
Some of the other ideas were just as amazing.
That was great. So, what would be your message to any electronics manufacturer listening right now? What should they take away from this conversation?
I think, I mean, operational efficiency is something that everybody's involved in. A lot of companies are still, when it comes to circular economy, it's not their focus. Let's be honest, manufacturing companies, they've got to make a profit, they've got to manufacture goods, they have to ship things often by air. There's no getting away from some of that stuff. But they typically all buy into operational efficiency. And a circular economy it's just one part of that efficiency. It makes no sense to scrap or bury or crush perfectly good components. Why would you do that? We make it so easy. We take all the labor, all the hassle out of it for you. Just give us access to the stock in whatever fashion you're comfortable, and we'll make sure it gets to a good home and you get your money back. It's a no-brainer. So for God's sake, stop ignoring it. I still visit factories and they go, oh, it's only so much percent of turnover. But it's profit. It's cash at this point. It's if it's 5% or 10% of your revenue, but you can turn that back into cash. That's massive. You're literally increasing your profit margin. So stop ignoring it would be the key message. Stop putting it to the side. Companies from time to time have a little focus on it. The CFO sees the big number and he'll suddenly scream about it. And folk will call us and they'll say, hey, I've got this excess problem I want your help with. It's quite often somebody quite junior that gets dumped with the job. And they'll explore it a little bit. They might hit a couple of obstacles and then the heat dies down. The CFO's off busy worrying about something else. So it just gets shelved. The project gets shelved. And that's frustrating for us when we were halfway there to solving a problem. And it's not focused this month. And it goes away. But it builds and it builds and it builds. That excess is just growing. And at some point it's going to get dumped in some fashion or cost you money to get rid of. Eventually you have to pay to get rid of it. So yeah, I always say act now. The best time to plant a tree. If you can't do it 20, 30 years ago, now's the best time. and it's the same for the yeah. It's kind of stolen. It's not really mine, but it is a good analogy. Yeah.
So if anyone wants to get in touch with you or learn more about your services, what's the best way to contact you or the company?
Yeah, componentsense.com. There's a number of ways to get through. We've got a phone number on our website. Unlike many companies, we welcome phone calls. You can call us. You can set up a meeting from there. I'll maybe drop you some details as well, so that you can share it with your listeners.
Great.
But yeah, many ways to get hold of us. Google us. Google Component Sense. You'll find us, or pop us into your favored AI tool.
Yeah. And for anyone who wants those links, I will be included in the YouTube description. So just check below. We'll have everything there that you need to get in touch. Kenny, thank you so much. This has been fascinating and really opened, I hope, some people's eyes to this whole world that people don't even seem to think about.
That's the plan. Yeah, I hope so. Thank you.
All right. And for anyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in. Come back next time. We will have another guest.